So you might be looking for a part-time job right now and are thinking whether or not it's a good idea to work at Starbucks as a barista. In this video, I'm gonna tell you about my experience working as a barista at Starbucks and whether or not I would ever do it again. And I know working at Starbucks, at first at least, seems like a cool, fun, and laid-back job, right? But after I tell you about my experience working at Starbucks as a barista for a few months, make up your own mind. I've got a ton to cover in this video. I've got 8 things that I want to talk about, starting from how much you can earn, the benefits, the perks of the job, training and experience you need, a day as a barista, the workload, what I liked and didn't like about the job, and finally, if you made up your mind and you want to apply, I'll also give you some very great tips for how you can get that job at Starbucks as soon as possible. And keep in mind, guys, that I worked at Starbucks in Toronto in Canada, so if you're planning to work in another country or even city, then things might be slightly different. I worked at Starbucks a few years ago, and at that time the hourly wage for working as a barista at Starbucks was $14 per hour, and I was paid on a bi-weekly basis, or every 2 weeks. If I look at one of my pay stubs, every 2 weeks I work approximately 38 hours. So at 38 hours at $14 per week, I was paid approximately $540 before tax. After deductions, which are tax, CBP, and EI, I was left with approximately $456 for those 2 weeks. But of course, a few years have passed now, so right now you might find that the hourly wage might be a few dollars more than back then. And at first you might think that calculating what you can earn every month is as simple as multiplying the number of hours, the fixed number of hours you work each month times your hourly wage. Unfortunately, this is something that I was quite surprised to find out about. When you work at Starbucks as a barista, your number of working hours are not guaranteed, meaning that although they tell you that you're hired part-time at approximately 18 to 20 hours per week, it doesn't mean that they will guarantee you those number of hours. The thing is that the branch manager of each Starbucks outlet needs to optimize their capacity, meaning that they need to make sure that they have enough staff for each shift, but at the same time they need to ensure that each person gets approximately a comparable number of hours worked each month. And because of that, baristas in the end sometimes end up with 15 hours per week, 20 hours per week, sometimes 18 hours per week, and so on. So you could say that if you work as a barista at Starbucks, your number of hours worked per week would fluctuate between 16 hours and let's say 20 hours. So you could use, for example, an average of 18 hours per week to calculate approximately how much you would earn every month. Let's go on and talk about tips, because usually you would think that in the service industry, in the food industry in particular, you can expect tips. And you know, there's so many fancy coffee shops where they actually have a tip jar, or they have a tip option for you to input on the payment machine. And at Starbucks, they also have this tip jar at the cashier. But I must tell you from my experience, at that time, I worked at a branch that was medium to high traffic. There was always a lot going on, and it was in a, I would say, a medium to high income neighborhood as well. But we didn't receive that many tips. Usually the supervisor of the branch would collect the tips, and then I think on a weekly or bi-weekly basis would just divide that amongst all the staff and distribute the tips in envelopes, and it would amount to approximately, I think, $8 to $12 at the most every 2 weeks, which is practically nothing. I mean, it's a nice added bonus, but it's not much. So if you're someone who wants to make a lot of extra money from tips, then Starbucks is not the place for you. Let's quickly talk about benefits, specifically health insurance. Do baristas at Starbucks in Canada get health insurance? And the answer is yes, depending on. Health insurance is offered by Starbucks to their baristas, subject to certain conditions, which are one number of months you work there. At that time, I think that was 3 months, and there was also a condition regarding how many hours you worked every week. So you had to meet a certain threshold to become eligible for health insurance. But of course, things may have slightly changed by now. So during your interview, I would strongly advise you to ask that to the manager interviewing you to get clarity about what the exact conditions are for you to get health insurance. And in the case that condition still applies, if there is still a condition that you have to work a certain number of hours per week in order to be eligible, then also ask the manager whether or not they will be able to guarantee you those minimum number of hours per week. Now let's get to the fun part, which is all about the perks. So this is the more fun and glamorous aspect, I would say, about working as a barista at Starbucks. And I think that these perks are the things that draws many people, especially younger people, to Starbucks. There are 3 main perks that I enjoyed during that time and should perhaps still be applicable right now, which is you get free drinks working as a barista at Starbucks. Duh, yeah, of course, if you're making coffee for everyone else, you would expect that you yourself get free drinks, right? I mean, at least you have to test the drinks. By the way, guys, if you found this video useful so far, then please do me a favor and hit the like button. That would be a big help to me and this channel because it would signal to YouTube that this video is useful and it would help this video to get out to more people. Thank you. Anyways, you get 3 drinks for every shift. I got 1 drink within 30 minutes of the start of my shift, and then I would get another free drink during my break, and then I would get my 3rd drink after my shift has ended within a 30-minute time frame. So I definitely never lacked caffeine on the job. And you can get any drink. Nothing is off limits. You can choose any drink that you like. The second perk was that I also got a discount on food, and at that time the discount was 30%. You know, those pastries, those sandwiches, etc. So you could just buy anything and get a 30% discount, which is quite good, but personally I thought it was not enough. I mean, if you work as a barista there, you should be able to get a higher discount, at least 50%, at least in my opinion. But still better than nothing. And the third perk is, this is especially great for those of you who are actually coffee addicts, which is that I got 1 pound of Starbucks coffee every 2 weeks. And this was something that I just really enjoy. After all, you know, those Starbucks coffee beans cost quite a lot. I think 1 pound bag cost around $8 to $10 or so. So the perks were great, but still, was this all worth it? You'll find out later on in this video. Now let's talk about training. You must be wondering, if I've never had any experience working as a barista, I don't know how to operate the the espresso machine and so on, will anyone train me or how does it work? So at that time, before I started my first day of work, I got approximately 2 weeks of training, but not full time. So within those 2 weeks, I think there were several days, 5, 6, or I don't remember exactly how many days. And on those days, I was trained for about 1 to 2 hours by another barista, by a barista trainer. And during that training, I was taught how to operate the espresso machine, how to make lattes, cappuccinos, and various other drinks, and also how to operate the oven to heat up food like sandwiches, croissants, etc., how to operate the till, how to accept cash, how to make card payments, how to input orders into the till. So that was more of the operational side. And then there was training about customer service, for example, how to deal with customer complaints, how you should attend to customers. And that, I would say, proved to be quite useful because, as you'll see later, there are sometimes customer complaints. And then there were also some online modules on work safety, etc. And of course, at that time when I did the training, it was pretty fun because I got to try all the different kinds of coffee. I was also taught about the differences between blonde, medium, and dark roast, and it was actually a lot of fun. But as I found out later, once I started my job, I realized that everything that I needed to learn, I think 98% of the job I would actually learn on the job and not during the training. So the training phase, just treat that as like a honeymoon phase, is really relaxed. You get to enjoy it and take your time. But once you're on the job, it's super hectic and sometimes gets super stressful. But more about that later. So what about experience? Do you need to have any experience in the food industry or preparing coffee, etc., if you want to work as barista at Starbucks? So personally, I didn't have any experience with coffee at all. But I must tell you that when I was 18 years old, I once worked as a kitchen helper in a German restaurant. So I put that on my resume, and I'm not sure whether or not that had any influence on whether I was accepted or not, but I would tend to think that that didn't really influence my application. And let's see what else. I didn't really have any experience in customer service because prior to this, I worked in banking for a long time as project manager, as some of you might know. So I was pretty much in the back office and not much serving customers. But during my studies in Germany, I once had a job working at the international admissions office where I had to consult new students who just arrived. So I could say that I had a little experience with customer service, but not really customer service in the retail industry. So personally, I would say that if you have any experience in the food industry or in the retail industry, in customer service, in sales, then that would definitely be a plus. But I would say that even if you do not have that kind of experience, do not let that hold you back from applying to a Starbucks job. I would say that as long as you have experience in your own kitchen, preparing food, preparing drinks, and you're someone who is good under pressure, that's something that's super, super important if you want to survive working at Starbucks, then there's no reason why you can't do it. You just need to find a way to convince the hiring manager that you can do the job. Now let's go on to the next thing, and let me tell you a bit about how a day working as a barista was like. And I'll start telling you about a normal shift, because there are different shifts that start at different times in the day. So a normal shift, I would say, would begin at, for example, 11 a.m. or 1 p.m. so during regular hours. And one shift usually would last anything from 3.5, 4 hours up to 5 hours. And trust me, at Starbucks, you wouldn't want to work longer than 5 hours per shift. So when you're working as barista at Starbucks, there are basically three main roles. The first role is handling the till, working at the till, or the cashier if you're not familiar with the word till. So once you arrive at the branch and after you've enjoyed your free Starbucks drink, then usually your supervisor would assign you to one of these three roles. And the first one is working at the till. So if you're working at the till, operating the cashier, you are responsible for getting in customers' orders. I mean, you've been to Starbucks, you've been a customer at Starbucks, so just imagine yourself to be on the other side of the cashier. So a customer would come up and then they would tell you what they want to order, and sometimes it's a very simple drink. So for example, I want a tall blonde roast, or I want a venti americano with a bit of milk. But sometimes there are these super, super complicated orders with a ton of modifications. And this is what some baristas often complain about. And I must admit that it's not something that's easy to deal with. There are people who come in, order a Frappuccino, and it has like 8 modifications, anything from the sugar level, ice level, how many scoops of chocolate chip they want, how much or what kind of milk they want, how many pumps of syrup, and so on. But as long as you're working at the till, it's still okay. Your job here is just to input the order correctly and not make a mistake. And actually, that's quite simple, because they use this POS system where you just easily type in the order. After you've done that, you receive the payment either in cash or using credit card, debit card, or Starbucks reward card. So if the customer orders a drink that has espresso in it, meaning that you need to use the espresso machine, usually you would just hand that over to the person handling the espresso bar and they would get the drink done. But if the person just orders something like a brewed coffee, and usually the brewed coffee dispenser is just behind the till, you would just turn to the back, fill in the cup, and serve the customer the coffee. That is if you do not have any other support person to assist you. Sometimes there is someone else assigned to do that, but if not, then you have to handle that as well. And in addition to that, if the person not only wants a drink but also wants some food, for example a croissant or a sandwich, then you will also need to handle that if you do not have anyone else helping you. So you would need to fetch that sandwich or that pastry or whatever and then heat that up in the oven and serve that to the customer. But sometimes heating up takes like a minute or two, so in the meantime you would attend to the next customer, but you still have to keep in the back of your mind that you still have that croissant in the oven, so you have to kind of be good at coordinating things. And of course, if there are just 2 or 3 customers in line, it's very, very easy to handle. But once there is a line of, let's say, 6 or 8 people and they all have complicated orders, then sometimes it can get pretty stressful. Suddenly you feel like a robot handling the till and getting coffee and also handling the oven for food, and you just pivot around between these 3 stations. Personally, I must say that sometimes you get into such a groove and it goes so smooth and so well that there are times when you could even enjoy it. I mean, you kind of get into a state of flow when you're doing it right. But when there's too much traffic, sometimes it can just get too much. Let's go to the second role, which is handling the bar. Sometimes you will be assigned to the bar, usually not right away when you just started working, maybe in your second or third week when you're ready. And your job as a barista on the bar is what the job is actually all about, right? Making drinks, making espresso drinks, lattes, cappuccinos, etc. for the customer. And there are people who either really enjoy working on the bar and people who absolutely hate it. And it really depends, I guess, on how good you are at making those drinks and memorizing those recipes and coordinating everything. Like I said before, the barista at the till punches in all the orders from the customer customers those complicated drinks, but then you at the bar are the one who has to make all these drinks. And again here, if there are only 2 or 3 customers and it's just an Americano or a cafe misto or a latte, then it's easy peasy, no problem at all. But once you got a group of, let's say, 8 high school students coming into the branch and all ordering 8 different kinds of frappuccinos, then sometimes it can become quite of a mess. And at times, to be fair, when it's very, very busy, there are even 2 baristas working at the bar. But it's not always the case because, of course, it's difficult to predict the traffic. So sometimes there was a situation where I ended up being alone at the bar and there are tons of people lining up and I had to make all these drinks. But at the same time, I also had to keep an eye on the mobile orders. So you know, guys, right? You can order Starbucks online now. You can get it delivered to you via Uber. So if previously, let's just say as an example, as a Starbucks barista at the bar, you had to make 50 drinks per hour. Suddenly with those mobile orders that came in online, you had an additional, let's say 20 mobile orders. You had to make an additional, let's say 20 drinks. And of course, this will be different from branch to branch. There will be branches where there are rarely any mobile orders, and then there will be branches that have like the same number of mobile orders as in-store orders. And that's when it can get really stressful, right? Because when you have 5 customers lining up, all waiting for their drinks, you can't just make drinks for them and then ignore those mobile orders. Then you kind of have to rotate between making 1 or 2 drinks for customers who are there in person and then attending to the mobile orders, because if you ignore the mobile orders, then suddenly the customer will walk in and will ask you, where is my mobile order? I ordered it like 20 minutes ago and it's still not ready, right? And then you get a complaint. But if you ignore the people in the store, then they will wonder, where is my drink? I've been waiting here for 5 minutes and I see you preparing drinks for other people. So that's not always easy to handle. But if I could say one thing about empathy is that once I experienced working at Starbucks, that is when I really understood what people working in the service industry have to go through. These are in general very hardworking, very fast-working people who are usually understaffed, and they have to work at very high speed, coordinating a lot of things and making sure that there are no customer complaints. So after working at Starbucks, now I kind of changed my attitude whenever I go into a store because I really know what they're dealing with. One of the big challenges also when you're working at the bar and preparing these drinks is when you suddenly run out of some ingredient that you really need. For example, you need almond milk, but then you open the fridge and you realize that there is no more almond milk because one of the other baristas responsible for stocking up has not stocked up in time. And then you might say, no problem. Just go to the back of the store to the storage room and get the milk, right? Correct. And that will take you perhaps 1 minute if it's an item that's easy to find. But if it's something that's in a box and you have to open the box first and it's difficult to find where it is, it might take you 2 minutes. And 2 minutes in the Starbucks store universe is an entirety. If you work in a high traffic area, within 2 minutes, there can be 5 additional customers lining up that you don't attend to. So once when I did a morning shift and it was really busy and most of the people were just getting brewed coffee. So the brewed coffee that is already made and that you just dispense from the coffee dispenser. I counted that I sold about 1 cup of coffee every 20 to 30 seconds. I know that's very fast. So guys, I must say that the problem is not that it's a lot of work, but the problem is that oftentimes these branches are severely understaffed or the staffing is not optimal. Like at some times when it's going very slow, there are more people than needed, but at times when there's high traffic, there are just not enough people. But let's talk more about that later. Let's go on to the third function, which is a kind of support function. Unfortunately, working as a barista at Starbucks does not just entail making coffee and handling the till, which is like the cleaner work. Every now and then, you'll also be assigned to a supporting function. And especially in the beginning, when your skills of making coffee at the bar are not that good yet, usually you will do more of the supporting. So what falls under supporting? That's everything from bussing the tables, so going around the floor, picking up used cups and cleaning, wiping the table, and then taking out the garbage. And you're also responsible for stocking up things. For example, making sure that there are enough milk jugs prepared in the fridge. You know, those jugs with milk and cream that are usually put outside for customers to self-serve. You have to make sure that there are enough of those jugs prepared in the fridge so that when one is empty, you can just quickly replace that. Also restock things like cups and those little sugar sachets and sugar substitutes. And it also involves a bit of lifting. You know those Starbucks cups? They use hundreds or even thousands of those per day. And those are usually packed in super huge cartons, and depending on where the storage is located in the branch you're working, you will either need to go upstairs and then carry those boxes down, or in my case, I had to go down into the basement and then carry some of those boxes up and then unload them and stock those cups for the barista to use. And one time in the winter when it was snowing a lot and snow was piling up in front of the branch, I even had to shovel snow. That was a one-time occasion. Okay, that doesn't happen very frequently, but it's something that you have to be prepared for. But guys, here comes the thing that I hated the most, and that I think every barista hates the most, is that working at Starbucks, baristas are also responsible for cleaning the washrooms and the floors. And this is something that I think is not a really great idea. I mean, of course, I understand the sentiment. They want the baristas to be responsible for the end-to-end process, right? Or is it just an excuse to save money? And when they clean the bathroom, they need to wear these gloves for safety reasons, just in case someone threw a needle or some toxic waste in the garbage, then you are somewhat protected from it, and then you use all these chemicals to clean the bathroom. So personally, I think that it doesn't really make sense to combine the job of working at the bar, where you're handling food and milk and coffee, serving drinks to the customer, with cleaning the washroom. Okay, but anyway, I just wanted to let you know that that is something that you have to be prepared for. Working at Starbucks is not just doing the nice, clean things, but you also have to get down and dirty. Okay, let's rewind a bit about a day as a barista. So I told you about those three main roles: working at the till, the bar, and also as a support function. Now I want to give you two additional scenarios that kind of affect how your working day looks like. And this pertains to the hour at which you start working. So just now I described that the regular hours would be like starting at 10 a.m., 11 a.m., or 1 p.m., but then there's also opening and closing. So everyone definitely gets to open. Gets to open or has to open? Has to open. And in my case back then, I think that was 5 a.m. So at 5 a.m., so 5 minutes before 5 a.m., I would arrive at the branch together with another barista or supervisor usually, and then we would prepare the food display and we would start brewing some coffee. We would get the chairs down the table and just make sure that everything looks good and is prepared. And then when the branch opens, usually in the morning, a lot of customers start pouring in, usually people who are going to work. And my branch at that time was located very close to a subway station, so you can just imagine how much traffic there was. So I would say that the great thing about working at Starbucks is that time flies by in no time. So at least in my case, because I was always so busy and I rarely had a minute to just do nothing except during my break, the time just flew by and I didn't notice it. Suddenly 3-4 hours were already over. Okay, let's talk about the other shift, which is the closing shift. So if you close, you usually would start at like 5:30 or 6 p.m. So I closed the branch with a supervisor several times, started at 5:30, 6, and worked until like 10 p.m. And I would say that even though evening hours were better for me because I'm more of a night person, working during closing hours is more exhausting. So when you get to the branch like at 5:30, usually the state of the branch is somewhat in a mess. I mean, compared to what it looked like in the morning. And you can imagine there were tons of customers there already. There's maybe some garbage, some spills that the others didn't manage to take care of. And then you hop onto the floor in the evening and you immediately start serving customers. But then the great thing is usually at around 8 or 9, it quiets down. There's not too much to do. But that's exactly when you have to start cleaning up. So the great thing about Starbucks is that they're very hygienic, meaning that on a daily basis, everything is cleaned and run through the machines and sanitized. That is the great thing. But for the baristas, it's a ton of work. We have to take out all the equipment, clean everything. And the last step would usually be to sweep the floor and also mop the floor. And depending on how large your branch is, that can be a lot of work. Usually during closing, there are only 2 baristas left. So if one person is operating the till and waiting for customers in case anyone comes at 9:30 p.m., usually it's up to the other one to do the whole sweeping and mopping by herself. Okay, in a bit, I will give you some tips on how you can get a job as a barista at Starbucks as fast as possible in the case that you are still interested after hearing all of this. But before before, I want to talk a bit about how I liked it and whether or not I would do it again. Okay, for context, I worked at Starbucks when I just arrived in Canada. After a few months, my mindset was just that I wanted to get some local work experience, and I was just willing to do anything. I didn't really care what. I just wanted to get a job. And at the same time, I was really a coffee freak and I wanted to learn more about coffee, and I was even thinking of maybe someday opening my own coffee shop. So working as a barista was kind of an item that was on my bucket list, and that is the reason why I applied to Starbucks. So if you have a similar goal in mind, that you just want to have any kind of job and that you want to learn about how to make coffee, then I think working at Starbucks for a while could be a good idea. But if you're just doing it for the money, then I will tell you that there are many better options, because you really don't earn much at Starbucks. There are tons of other part-time jobs where you can earn more and where you get more tips or even commissions, and where it's more relaxed and laid back. In fact, a few weeks back, I made a video about my experience working as a salesperson at a furniture store, and I'll link this video up for you here, where I also earned commission. It was much more laid back and I enjoyed it more. So if you're interested to know that, then make sure that you watch this video later and consider if that might be a better option for you than working as a barista. And also, if what you're looking for is earning money from tips, then maybe it might be a better idea to work as a waiter. If you want to learn something about the food, the beverage industry, or you're interested in how Starbucks operates in general, then I think that working there is a very good experience. It's very fast-paced, and by working there, you practically get a very good idea about how the whole operation of the branch works. Of course, if you work as a supervisor or branch manager, you get an even better idea about the whole operations, the finances, staffing, etc. But I think that even at the level of a barista, you can really learn a lot. Also, if you've never really worked in customer service before, like me, then I think it's a very good opportunity to learn about it, because working in a cafe, you have to deal with a customer face to face. If you work in an office, you can hide behind your screen, behind a ton of emails. But when you're in the cafe and you talk to a customer and you get a complaint or whatever, then you have to deal with that on the spot. And I think that's a very valuable experience to learn how you deal with those complaints, how you try to understand the customer, how to appease the customer while retaining your own dignity, of course, and then solving the whole problem pretty well. I think that is a skill that will prove very useful later on, even in other jobs. Talking about flexibility, I would say that the flexibility working as barista at Starbucks is, I would give it a grade B. So as you know, at Starbucks, there are a ton of students working. Younger first-time students, as well as older students who are doing their master's or PhD, or even just people who need a part-time job and have a side hustle, right? So they have their own schedules, their own commitments, and usually the branch manager will be open to considering your needs. You can tell them, this and this is my school schedule, this is my fixed schedule, and these are the times I can work. If that happens to work with the branch's overall schedule as well, then usually the manager will accommodate your requests and kind of adjust your schedule to make it fit. But of course, it's not always the case, and that is why it's very important that you mention it up front. Before you start working. Before you start working, tell the manager, the interviewing manager, what your needs are for scheduling. Because in the end, of course, Starbucks will always prioritize their staffing needs to your scheduling needs. So the upside is that you have some flexibility, but the downside is, what I didn't like that much, is that your schedule would change from month to month. So every month there is a different schedule, and there is no real stability in the schedule. And it doesn't only change monthly, in fact, it changes weekly. So every month you would receive a new schedule, but within that month, each week can look different. For example, this week you work Monday, Tuesday, Fridays at 5 a.m., and then 11 a.m. And then the following week, your shifts are Tuesday, Wednesday, and Saturday, and you start at 11 a.m. and then 3 p.m. and then 6 p.m. and so on. So is working as a barista at Starbucks for you or not? I would say that it really depends, and it depends largely on your personality. In addition to all the things I mentioned before, right? Like what your goals are, how much you want to earn, how much flexibility you need, and so on. But it largely depends on your personality, whether or not Starbucks is the right place for you, whether you thrive or not. The more extroverted you are, the more suitable working as barista at Starbucks will be. Why? Because you have constant interaction with tons of people every day. On the other hand, if you're an extreme introvert, then after a while it might overwhelm you. After a few hours of constantly interacting with people, with customers, handling customer complaints, you might just end up feeling drained. And personally, I am an introvert, in case you haven't noticed, so it wasn't really the right thing for me. For a couple of months during which I worked there, it was fine, but I could never do this long term. It's just not for me. So let's talk a bit about what I didn't like that much, and which I mentioned before, is that oftentimes it was severely understaffed. So when the staffing was just right, it was actually pretty pleasant and fun to work at. During those hours, 2 or 3 hours where we were severely understaffed and there was an overwhelming number of customers coming in, it was just too much. It was just too stressful. And I believe that I am not the only one. At that moment, the job turned from something that was quite enjoyable to just hell. Because of course you want to do a good job, and you also want to do it correctly. You want to make the correct drinks. You want to make sure that the branch is in order, but you also need to maintain the speed. And then if there's one customer complaint that holds up the whole line and there's only one other person working besides you, then it can turn into quite of a mess. Talking about workload, what's the workload like? And I would say that it really depends on the branch, because there are some branches where it is more quiet, there is not much traffic, but I think that's the minority. The majority of Starbucks branches are located in very strategic areas, close to public transit, in the middle of city, and usually there's a ton of traffic. I was at a branch where there was medium to high traffic, so I wouldn't say it's the highest traffic, but not medium either, so somewhere in between. And I rarely had a moment where I could catch my breath. There was always something to do. And note that I was working at a regular branch with no drive-through. There are branches, that have drive-through services, and from what I heard, I had a colleague who worked at a drive-through branch once. She said that it was just crazy there because it's even more hectic and the workload is even larger. Expectation was that I would craft delicious drinks for customers and maybe have a little chat with them, but reality was that at most times I would be working like a robot and would have no time at all to do any chit chat with customers. I would just rush through from one order to the next like a machine. So in summary, would I do this again or not? Would I work at Starbucks again or not? I would say that working as a barista at Starbucks for a limited time for me is a good idea. And perhaps I would do it again in the future if I really had to and I had no other option. But in any case, I would not do it for the long term. Now let's get to the last point in case you're still interested in working at Starbucks, and that is tips to get a job fast. Tips to apply for the job. And you might think that it's as easy as filling out an online application and then voila, after a few days you get the job. And sometimes it works, but not always, because you have to keep in mind that there are a lot of people also applying to work at Starbucks. I just want to remind you that when I applied, I didn't have the perfect background or the perfect experience. I didn't have real experience in the food industry or customer service, and I didn't know anything about coffee, so I think that I might have been a weak candidate, but I got the job nevertheless in about 2 weeks. So this is what I did. First, I filled out the online application. At first, I was pretty optimistic. I thought, okay, in a few days, I'll just get a call and I'll get a job, right? But no, that didn't happen at all. And I was wondering what happened to my application, right? And at that time, I just arrived in Canada and I just needed any job and I really needed the money. So what I did was I printed out my resume and I went to the branch directly and asked to meet the branch manager. But at that time, the branch manager was not there. So I asked the person, okay, when is she usually around, and went home again. So the next day or so, I went again with my resume and I introduced myself. I said, hi, I already submitted an online application. My name is so-and-so. I would really love to work here, and so on. And the branch manager was really impressed that I made the effort to drop by in person. And she said that the next day she would call me. And that happened. So the next day I immediately got a phone interview, and then I was invited to an interview on the site. And all of that happened within a few days. I did the interview. After the interview, I prepared a thank you note, a thank you card, and I handed that to the branch manager as a sign of appreciation. And after another 2 days, I actually got the job. So this is my tip to you. Do not just rely on online applications for any kind of service job, because then sometimes you can get lucky and get called in, but sometimes you can just wait forever. If you really want that job, then make an effort and drop by the branch or the outlet and try to meet the manager directly and bring a copy of your resume. Usually they will really appreciate that because it just shows that you put in extra effort and that you are proactive. Also, a big tip I have is do not just apply to any branch, especially if you're planning to work at Starbucks, because branches differ. What I would do is to intentionally pick the branch, the exact branch that you want to work for. And let's say that you are thinking of 3 branches. Drop by the branches and sit there for 1 to 2 hours in the morning or the afternoon to get a feel of how much traffic there is in the branch and how the atmosphere is like, and imagine if you would want to work at that particular branch or not. So guys, that was it for today. If you think that working at Starbucks is not for you after all, and you are thinking of getting a job where you can earn commission, then make sure that you check out this video where I tell you about my experience working at a furniture store. Thank you so much for watching, guys, and I'll see you in the next video.